He's an American original.
That was it. There was a certain authenticity about
When these people, this is getting very uncomfortable.
Hollywood adored her, the dazzling redhead with unmatched charm and timeless elegance. But behind Ann-Margret's radiant smile was a woman who never forgot betrayal. For decades, she stayed silent, refusing to stir the pot, even when others crossed the line. Now at 76, stories have emerged, whispering the truth about 6 actors she allegedly couldn't stand. From bruised egos to behind-the-scenes clashes, these weren't just petty feuds. They were deeply personal. Let's dive into the names that Ann-Margret, the icon of grace, may have quietly resented all along. 1. John Wayne, a battle of egos on the frontier. On screen, it was a dream pairing. Ann-Margret, the fiery and seductive starlet, sharing the frame with John Wayne, the towering icon of American masculinity. Their 1973 Western. The train robbers promised charisma, chemistry, and classic Hollywood magic. But when the cameras stopped rolling, the energy shifted dramatically. John Wayne was used to being the undisputed leader on any set. By the early 70s, he wasn't just a star, he was an institution. Directors often stepped aside to let him call the shots, and many actors deferred to his larger-than-life presence. But Ann-Margret wasn't just any actress. She was independent, disciplined, and in no mood to be overshadowed or talked down to. Sources from the production claimed that Wayne often dismissed suggestions from others, including Ann-Margret. When she pushed back on certain blocking or dialogue choices, he allegedly cut her off with a wave of his hand, treating her input as little more than background noise. It wasn't just patronizing, it was humiliating. Behind the scenes, the tension was palpable. Though she remained professional in front of the crew, Ann-Margret was said to have confided in close friends that working with Wayne was one of the most emotionally taxing experiences of her career. "He didn't see me as a partner," she reportedly said. "He saw me as someone to control." Despite the film's moderate success, Ann-Margret never worked with Wayne again, and according to insiders, she had no desire to. What could have been a powerhouse collaboration ended in bitterness, wounded pride, and a silent vow never to let herself be minimized again. One thing was certain, Ann-Margret never forgot how he made her feel. 2. Elvis Presley. A love that turned sour. To the public, they were the stuff of Hollywood fantasy. Ann-Margret and Elvis Presley, the king of rock and the queen of the screen, setting the screen on fire in Viva Las Vegas, 1964. Their chemistry was undeniable, and behind the scenes, it blossomed into a real-life romance that captivated gossip columns and fans alike. But while the passion was real, so was the pain. Ann-Margret once described their relationship as soul-deep, and for a time, it looked like marriage might be in the cards. They shared a love for music, motorcycles, and performing. Yet even as their bond grew stronger, there was a shadow looming over them. Priscilla Presley, Elvis's longtime girlfriend, and eventually his wife. When Elvis ultimately chose to stay with Priscilla and ended things with Ann-Margret, it wasn't done with kindness or closure. Reports say that one day he simply cut all contact, leaving her stunned and heartbroken. She wasn't just blindsided, she was humiliated. To make matters worse, Priscilla allegedly banned any future contact between them. For years afterward, Ann-Margret never spoke poorly of Elvis in public. In fact, she remained unusually respectful, even protective of his memory. But those close to her tell a different story. Friends claimed she was devastated by how he discarded her and how she was treated like a dirty little secret once the relationship ended. And when Elvis died in 1977, she reportedly skipped the funeral. Not out of coldness, but because the pain ran too deep. In private, she mourned what could have been. But she also held on to the hurt, not just of lost love, but of how someone she trusted had disappeared without a word. The truth is, love turned to resentment, and Ann-Margret never fully forgave Elvis, not for leaving, but for how he did it. Frank Sinatra, the night the glamour died. In the glitzy world of Las Vegas lounges and Rat Pack bravado, Frank Sinatra reigned supreme, and for a while, Ann-Margret was considered part of that world, the rising bombshell with a velvet voice and enough sex appeal to make even Sinatra's inner circle take notice. But behind the showbiz smiles and nightclub appearances, something far darker festered between the two. It began with what should have been a career highlight. In the mid-1960s, Ann-Margret was invited to perform alongside Sinatra at one of his exclusive Las Vegas shows. It was a big deal, a sign that she was being welcomed into the highest circles of entertainment royalty. But from the moment she arrived, she sensed the atmosphere was colder than expected. Sinatra, known for his temper and mood swings, reportedly didn't appreciate the attention Ann-Margret was receiving. Some insiders suggested he saw her as a threat, a scene stealer who could turn the spotlight away from him. Others claimed it went deeper, that Sinatra simply didn't respect her, viewing her as a pinup girl rather than a serious talent. During rehearsals, tensions boiled. Sinatra was allegedly curt, dismissive, and made veiled jokes at her expense. One source even claimed he told a stagehand, "She's got legs, not pipes. Let's not pretend she's Judy Garland." Ann-Margret, who had spent years proving herself as more than just a pretty face, was devastated. Things came to a head one night during soundcheck. After Ann-Margret requested a slight adjustment to the band's timing for her number, Sinatra reportedly exploded. "This is my show," he barked. "You don't call the shots here." She stood her ground, but the damage was done. That evening's performance was tense, and by the end of the week, she was gone. Ann-Margret never worked with Frank Sinatra again. She never publicly criticized him, but she also never forgot the sting of that experience. In private, she described him as ice in a silk suit, charming on the surface, but cold and cutting underneath. Some believe it wasn't just professional tension, that perhaps Sinatra couldn't handle a woman who wouldn't submit to his ego. Whatever the case, that chapter closed abruptly, and the memory left a bitter taste. Ann-Margret may have endured many slights in her career, but few were as personal as the humiliation Sinatra delivered with a smile. Bette Davis, when two leading ladies collided. If there's one name in Hollywood that sparks both awe and intimidation, it's Bette Davis, known for her commanding presence, sharp tongue, and refusal to be overshadowed by anyone, male or female. Davis built a career on defiance. So when a rising Ann-Margret was cast opposite her in a 1970s made-for-TV drama that never made it past early production, it was destined to be a clash of titans. From the very first table read, the energy in the room was electric, and not in a good way. Ann-Margret, still youthful and radiant, came prepared, professional, and confident. Davis, decades older but fiercely protective of her legacy, allegedly walked in with a chip on her shoulder. To her, Ann-Margret represented everything she resented about the new Hollywood: beauty over substance, youth over experience, and sex appeal over grit. According to production assistants, Davis barely acknowledged Ann-Margret outside of rehearsals. On set, she referred to her as the little red one and often interrupted scenes to correct her delivery. At first, Ann-Margret tried to stay gracious. She was still in awe of Bette Davis, the legend, but the constant undermining wore her down. One moment in particular stands out. During a particularly emotional scene, Ann-Margret poured her soul into the take, only for Davis to roll her eyes and mutter, "Somebody hand her a mirror." The crew was stunned. Ann-Margret, visibly shaken, left the set for the day. Rumors swirled that she considered quitting the project altogether. It's unclear whether Davis was threatened, irritated, or simply exercising dominance. Some believe she saw in Ann-Margret a reflection of the roles she was no longer being offered: the ingenue, the object of desire, the rising phoenix. Others say Davis just couldn't stand sharing the spotlight with someone she hadn't personally approved of. The project ultimately fell apart before it could air, and those close to Ann-Margret say she was relieved. In private, she reportedly told a friend, "I wanted to respect her. I really did. But some stars only shine when others are dimmed." Ann-Margret never named Davis publicly, and perhaps she didn't have to. The encounter was short-lived, but the sting of being belittled by a woman she once admired lasted for years. 5. Anthony Quinn, the seduction that went too far. Ann-Margret had her share of admirers in Hollywood. That was inevitable. With her electric presence and striking beauty, she was often pursued by co-stars, producers, and even directors. But not every encounter was flattering, and one of the most uncomfortable, according to several close to her, involved Anthony Quinn, the legendary star of Zorba the Greek, and a man known for his forceful personality, both on and off screen. Their paths crossed in the late 1960s during a Hollywood fundraiser event where both were invited as guest performers. Ann-Margret had recently made waves with Bye Bye Birdie and Viva Las Vegas and was gaining traction not only as a glamorous figure, but as a serious actress. Quinn, meanwhile, was well into his 50s, a powerhouse actor with a volcanic reputation. Charismatic? Yes, but also notoriously aggressive. The evening started off friendly enough. They posed for photographs, exchanged pleasantries, and even shared a few laughs. But later that night, things took a turn. According to sources who were present, Quinn cornered Ann-Margret backstage after her performance. He praised her beauty, her energy, and then made it unmistakably clear that he wanted more than a professional connection. Ann-Margret, always tactful, tried to deflect. She thanked him politely and moved to leave. But Quinn reportedly wasn't accustomed to rejection. He grabbed her wrist and whispered something in her ear that made her expression change instantly, from calm to visibly disturbed. A stagehand rushed in seconds later, sensing tension, and Quinn finally let her go. The incident was never reported publicly. Ann-Margret, like many women in that era, chose silence over scandal. But friends said she was shaken. She later confided that she felt powerless in that moment, not just because of Quinn's physicality, but because she knew no one would believe her over a man of his stature. Years later, when asked about actors she refused to work with, she reportedly responded cryptically, "There are men in this business who smile for the camera and grab you in the dark. I've learned to stay away from both." While no film or project ever brought them back together, Anthony Quinn's name remained one that Ann-Margret never spoke and never forgot. Behind the glamour of red carpets and golden statues was a memory that she buried quietly, but never forgave. 6. Steve McQueen, the cool rebel who crossed the line. At first glance, they seemed like a perfect on-screen pairing. Ann-Margret, with her sultry charm and emotional depth. Steve McQueen, the king of cool, with his brooding silence and unshakable swagger. They represented two different energies of Hollywood, one smoldering, the other simmering. So when producers tried to cast them together in a late 1960s action drama that never fully materialized, it was supposed to be cinematic gold. But sparks flew in the wrong direction. According to multiple sources involved with pre-production, the friction began during early rehearsals and contract negotiations. McQueen, known for his meticulous control over projects, was reportedly uncomfortable with how much screen time Ann-Margret was being given. He argued that the film should center on his character and allegedly tried to have her role trimmed, even though she had already been announced as the co-lead. Ann-Margret, who had fought hard for equal billing and substantial roles, pushed back. She had no interest in being reduced to eye candy in another man's story. And when she refused to compromise her part, McQueen's demeanor reportedly shifted from icy to openly hostile. Behind closed doors, he referred to her as a diva, a claim that those who knew Ann-Margret scoffed at. In fact, many on the crew noted that she was consistently punctual, prepared, and kind. The tension escalated during a script read-through, where McQueen reportedly snapped at her for milking the lines and accused her of trying to upstage him. Ann-Margret, visibly stunned, stayed silent during the exchange. But afterward, she walked out of the room and, according to a close friend, vowed never to work with McQueen again. He didn't want a partner, she reportedly said. He wanted a mirror. The project eventually collapsed under the weight of creative differences. Publicly, no one ever mentioned the feud, but insiders later shared that McQueen's ego and possessiveness over his image had clashed too violently with Ann-Margret's quiet strength. To this day, fans wonder what kind of film the two might have made together. But for Ann-Margret, that was a door she closed permanently, not because of artistic incompatibility, but because he made her feel expendable in a world where she'd worked too hard to matter. And that, perhaps more than anything, is what Ann-Margret never forgave.